Some places on Earth were never meant to be discovered. Frozen lands where the cold isn't just a temperature, it's a warning. Hidden beneath layers of ice and secrecy, there are rooms, tunnels, and files the government hoped no one would ever find. And yet, someone did. Because secrets this big never stay buried forever. The dead tell stories, but sometimes the living leave behind secrets that are far more dangerous than the dead ever could. Alaska in winter is a place the world almost forgets exists. The horizon is endless white, broken only by jagged peaks that pierce a sky so dark it feels infinite. No birds, no animals, just wind that screams across the ice, carrying with it the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache and your bones feel like glass. Most people imagine secrets buried in snow are frozen in time, trapped like insects in amber. But the truth is far worse. Some secrets are preserved intentionally, hidden deliberately, stored in ways that only the brave or the foolish dare to uncover. And that's exactly where I found myself, standing in front of a facility that officially didn't exist. It looked innocuous from a distance, an industrial hangar half buried in frost, with steel doors thick enough to resist a dozen blasts. The government called it AL-57B on internal documents. Locals had no name for it. I only knew it existed because someone wanted it erased from memory, but not entirely. Inside, the air smelled of metal and dust, frozen so cold that each exhale formed a mist heavier than a cloud. It was dead quiet, but beneath the silence was something else. The faint hum of electricity. Power, someone still maintained it. But for what? The first thing I noticed wasn't the chambers or the tunnels. It was the crates. Hundreds of metal crates stacked in precise rows, each stamped with labels so cryptic they looked like code. Project Nemo, files classified, eyes only. I ran my gloved fingers across the top of one crate. Cold steel. Cold enough to make me shiver, but colder was the thought that someone, decades ago, had packed these files, knowing they could kill if misused. I opened the first crate carefully, half expecting a trap. Inside were folders, meticulously organized, each containing decades of handwritten notes, blueprints, photographs, and lab reports. Some were so old the paper crumbled when touched, but the ink was strangely preserved. The content was worse than I could have imagined. There were diagrams of chambers, tunnels, and containment pods. Names of experiments, dates, and protocols that had no place in modern ethics. Photos of human subjects, frozen, some with eyes stitched shut, others contorted unnaturally. Handwritten notes detailing cognitive experiments, reanimation tests, containment failures. Some reports even mentioned deaths, but in clinical, detached terms, as if human lives were nothing more than test tubes. And yet, there was more. Among the files were references to other facilities, coordinates scattered across Alaska and even across the Arctic Circle. This wasn't just a single site. This was a network, a labyrinth of experiments spanning decades, hidden from every official record. And somewhere within that labyrinth was the real horror, knowledge that no one was supposed to find. I flipped through one particularly old folder labeled Operation Deep Frost, 1972. Inside, diagrams showed underground chambers connected by tunnels I had walked above without knowing they existed. Each chamber had labels: containment, observation, reanimation. There were notes in the margins, handwriting that was almost frantic, like the author was trying to warn someone else. Do not reopen. If alive, destroy the files immediately. I realized something important. The tunnels were dangerous. The chambers were dangerous. But these files, these records, were the real threat. Knowledge preserved carefully over 50 years, waiting for someone curious enough to stumble upon them. I kept opening crates, one after another. There were thousands. Each folder revealed a new layer of the operation. Experiments on memory, on cognition, on human endurance. There were attempts to awaken subjects after decades of suspension. And always, lurking behind every note, was the same warning. Failure was unacceptable. The world could not know. At one point, I paused, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of it. I realized the paradox. These were government secrets meant to preserve security, yet they were more dangerous than any weapon. Not because of explosives, but because of what they could teach a person who wasn't meant to know. I found a folder marked Subject 42, Final Protocol. Most of the labels were scratched out. Some had dates that didn't make sense. Notes written in pencil indicated that this subject was part of the ultimate test. The file contained diagrams of chambers deeper than anything above ground, controlled environments, and reanimation sequences. But the final page simply said, "If discovered, terminate protocol. File self-destruct failsafe. Active." And that was when I understood the real danger. I wasn't just holding information. I was holding the instructions to awaken something that might have been better left frozen. The paradox struck me hard. These files were proof that humans could outlive death, that technology could cheat time, but at the cost of morality, sanity, and perhaps life itself. The tunnels I had explored before, empty, silent, abandoned, were nothing compared to what knowledge in these crates represented. Someone reading these files could remake history, or end it. I continued deeper into the facility. The crates led to a small office, almost untouched. There were typewriters, filing cabinets, and a single phone with a dial frozen in place. On the desk lay a folder labeled Chronicles Command Only. Inside were logs of events nobody was supposed to know, recorded meticulously. Failed reanimation attempts. Subjects exhibiting abnormal behavior upon awakening. Observations of cognitive echoes. Memories transferred incompletely. Notes on environmental hazards created deliberately to test survival. One entry made my blood run cold. The subjects communicate differently after awakening, not in words, not in sound, in rhythm. A pulse we cannot fully comprehend. We fear what is aware. The thought of what this implied kept me frozen in place. If these experiments were real, and the files suggested they were, then the subjects might still exist somewhere, perhaps in chambers I had yet to see. Perhaps they were beyond containment. Perhaps the pulse noted in these logs was still active. I had to know more. I opened another crate marked Project Nemo, Annex Files. These were far more detailed. Blueprints of tunnels connecting multiple chambers under the ice. Automated systems designed to sustain environments for decades. Sensors and cameras that documented every action of the personnel involved. The creators had built a city beneath the snow, invisible from the sky, undetectable by radar. And in every corner, someone had recorded every detail. The files revealed something chilling. The tunnels and chambers weren't just experiments. They were archives. Archives of knowledge and control. And some of that control was still operational. Logs described systems that could detect intruders, environmental overrides that could trap people in chambers, and mechanisms designed to erase evidence. I flipped the page of one particularly fragile folder and froze. It was a photograph of a corridor, unmistakably part of the tunnels I had walked, but the timestamp read 2023, this year. The same corridor I had seen abandoned was active. Someone, or something, was maintaining it. The paradox became clearer. The facility looked dead, but the records suggested life. The tunnels were silent, yet files claimed observers were still monitoring every chamber. The dead subjects were contained, but the files themselves seemed alive, in a sense, guiding whoever found them, showing the way deeper into the network. I realized I had a choice. Stop here and walk away, leaving the knowledge buried forever. Or continue, risking what I didn't fully understand, just to know the truth. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in places like this, especially when the truth can't be unlearned. I chose to continue. As I moved past another stack of crates, I found a terminal half buried under frost. It flickered to life at the slightest touch, green text glowing across the screen. It displayed lists of chambers, subjects, experiments, and notes. Section Alpha, containment verified. Section Beta, reanimation sequence initiated. Section Gamma, subject deviation detected. Section Delta, files self-repairing. Do not remove. I stepped back. The files weren't just records. They were part of a living archive, a system designed to maintain knowledge, maintain control, even after decades of abandonment. They were the ghosts the tunnels had been hiding. And somewhere deep beneath the ice, the pulse mentioned in the logs, faint, rhythmic, remained, waiting, watching, alive in its own way. I looked at the crates surrounding me, thousands of folders, years of experiments, records of humans, machines, and something in between. I realized the paradox. In a place where death seemed final, knowledge was eternal, and far more dangerous than anything the dead could do. As I took a final look around the room before moving to the next section, I knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The tunnels were just the surface. The files were the heart. And whatever lay beneath them was still alive. I had seen the tunnels, touched the ice, and walked among the frozen horrors, but nothing prepared me for what the files would awaken. Somewhere beneath this facility, the heart of Project Nemo was still beating, and it knew I was here. You can walk on ice and think it's solid, but beneath the surface, the ice has its own stories. The corridor stretched ahead, long, narrow, and frozen. Every step I took echoed in the silence, a hollow sound amplified by steel-reinforced walls. The frost lining the metal beams caught the dim light of my flashlight, scattering it into fragments that danced across the corridor like restless spirits. Each step reminded me I was far from the surface, far from help, and far from safety. The files I had discovered earlier weren't just records, they were maps. Hidden among the bureaucratic jargon, diagrams, and margin notes were instructions. Some lines almost invisible, others deliberately bold. Proceed only if absolutely necessary. Observe containment parameters. Do not disturb subjects. I hesitated, running a gloved hand along the wall. Metal was ice cold, colder than any Arctic winter. The paradox of the place pressed down on me. Abandoned, yet maintained. Lifeless, yet alive. Every corridor, every door, seemed designed to communicate something. We exist, but only for those who know how to see. The first chamber I reached was small, sealed with a heavy steel door. The label read, Alpha 12 Observation. According to the files, these chambers were where initial tests had been conducted decades ago. Each one was equipped with monitoring devices, pressure gauges, and cameras, now long dead. Frost covered the surfaces, creating an illusion of abandonment. But the files had hinted at something else. Sensors that could survive years, even decades, and remain active without external power. I opened the door slowly. The chamber was tiny, barely large enough for a single subject. Ice had formed inside like a grotesque sculpture. There were marks on the floor, human, animal. It was impossible to tell after decades. On the wall was a panel with switches and dials. My fingers hovered over them. I remembered the margin notes. Touch only if prepared to observe consequences. Do not activate beyond threshold. The paradox tightened. Knowledge promised insight, but insight could be fatal. And yet, curiosity had me moving forward. Deeper into the tunnels, the architecture changed. Corridors widened, floors were reinforced with steel grids, and the ceilings carried pipes and conduits. Some pipes emitted faint puffs of steam, a reminder that the place was not entirely dead. According to the files, these systems regulated temperature, pressure, and atmosphere. They were part of a network designed to maintain subjects indefinitely. I paused at a junction. 3 corridors branched ahead. The files contained references to sections beta and gamma, but the maps weren't precise. I had a choice: left, right, or straight. Each path promised discovery and danger. I chose left. Immediately, the temperature dropped. Frost formed in delicate patterns on the walls, glittering in my flashlight. There was a faint smell of chemicals, something acrid that stung the back of my throat. According to the files, this corridor led to chambers where cognitive experiments were conducted. Memory retention, behavioral conditioning, and environmental adaptation. Some of these experiments had been classified as unsuccessful, but the notes suggested failures were only partial. Subjects could survive, adapt, and even escape containment if left unchecked. I kept my hand on the wall. Each footstep crunched softly over frost. Then I heard it, a subtle vibration beneath my boots, almost imperceptible. I stopped, holding my breath. The files had warned. Even passive systems can activate under pressure. Be aware of tremors or changes in floor resonance. Something moved ahead. A shadow. My mind playing tricks. I remembered the photographs I had seen in the crates. Frozen subjects, empty chambers, strange distortions of light in photographs taken decades ago. They weren't all dead. I pressed forward, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The walls narrowed, then opened into a massive chamber. It was enormous, larger than anything I had expected. In the center was a raised platform surrounded by frozen tanks, each containing a subject partially preserved in liquid nitrogen. Frost formed intricate patterns over their bodies, distorting human features into something alien. The files had described this room as Gamma Core Final Observation. It was a culmination point for decades of experimentation. The notes described attempts to awaken the subjects, sometimes for only hours, sometimes for days. The results were unpredictable. Some subjects displayed cognitive awareness despite decades of dormancy. Others did not survive. I approached the first tank cautiously. The liquid inside shimmered under my flashlight, almost alive. The subject's eyes were open, not fully awake, but aware in a way that made my skin crawl. I remembered the warning. Do not awaken without authorization. Observed consciousness may act unpredictably. My pulse quickened. Curiosity warred with instinct. I leaned closer, examining the tank. A faint rhythm pulsed in the liquid, almost like a heartbeat. And then I noticed it. A subtle movement in the corner of the chamber. Something had shifted in the shadows. My flashlight flickered. The files had mentioned this too. Residual awareness. Subjects could interact with one another, even across chambers, without physical contact. They could perceive intrusions. They could communicate in ways beyond normal understanding. I backed away. My mind raced. Had I just been noticed, or was it something else? Another set of tanks lined the opposite wall. Inside were subjects I didn't recognize from the photographs. Some were skeletal, preserved beyond recognition. Others were intact, human in appearance, but with anomalies. Elongated limbs, distortions in facial structure, unnatural postures. Notes in the files suggested these were experimental enhancements, attempts to extend survival beyond natural limits. A sudden noise made me jump, a hissing sound like air escaping a pressurized pipe. I turned, flashlight sweeping the chamber, and caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. Something wasn't supposed to be here. Something that didn't belong. The files had contained a paragraph I hadn't fully grasped until now. Some subjects exhibit adaptation beyond predicted parameters. Approach with extreme caution. Awareness may not be limited to sight or sound. Proximity may trigger reaction. I realized I was no longer just observing. I was intruding into a space designed to maintain life beyond natural laws. A space where the very concept of death had been rewritten, and where the rules of reality were no longer guaranteed. I moved cautiously toward the terminal described in the files. It was supposed to contain real-time logs of subject activity, environmental conditions, and containment integrity. Frost covered the screen, but a light press with my gloves cleared enough to reveal rows of data. Subject 42, stable, cognitive pulses detected. Subject 43, environmental stress response, elevated awareness. Subject 44, unknown anomalies detected. I felt a chill. Anomalies were not uncommon in these experiments, but the files suggested these were beyond anything observed before. And if the data was accurate, these subjects weren't just surviving. They were evolving. I knew then the full scope of what I had stumbled upon. Decades of clandestine experimentation, designed not merely to preserve life, but to manipulate it, to push it beyond limits the world had never seen. And the paradox was undeniable. In a place designed for containment, there existed freedom. Freedom to adapt, to evolve, to resist control. And I was standing in the middle of it. My flashlight flickered again, shadows dancing across the walls. I froze. Then a sound, a subtle, almost imperceptible tap, like fingers on metal. It came from the far end of the chamber. I strained my eyes, but saw nothing. The files had warned of this phenomenon. Cognitive echo, a form of residual consciousness capable of interacting with intruders indirectly. It could manipulate perception, create phantom sounds, or even induce fear. The note had been chilling. Do not underestimate echo. It can compel actions beyond rational thought. I swallowed hard. My instincts screamed to leave, yet I couldn't turn back. Not yet. I had gone too far, uncovered too much. And the files, they demanded continuation. Curiosity, like a living entity, pushed me forward. I moved to the next chamber, doors sliding open with a hiss. Inside, the temperature rose slightly. Frost melted along the floor edges. There were beds, lab tables, and more tanks. Notes from the files indicated these were used for long-term observation. One sheet was labeled Psychological Integration. Subjects 45-50. The contents made my stomach turn. Attempts to integrate enhanced cognition with emotional conditioning. Attempts to teach the subjects to reason beyond instinct, to communicate with one another, to form collective intelligence. Some experiments were successful, others catastrophic. The files hinted at containment breaches, internal conflicts, and emergent behaviors that could not be predicted or controlled. I realized something crucial. The tunnels and chambers were only part of the story. The files revealed the real experiments were in consciousness itself, pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be human. And somewhere deeper, the facility was alive, waiting, observing, and calculating. I had walked through frozen chambers, seen the subjects, and touched the edge of forbidden knowledge. But the real test wasn't over. Deeper in the labyrinth, the heart of the project waited, and it knew I was coming. You think you understand fear until it whispers in your own language. The corridors seemed endless. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as though the facility itself resisted my intrusion. I was not alone, though I hadn't realized it at first. A shadow flitted past the corner of my eye, human, familiar, yet impossibly distant. "Who's there?" I called out, voice echoing strangely against the metal walls. Silence answered. But then, a faint, rasping reply came from ahead. "Dr. Vega, is that you?" I froze. Dr. Elena Vega had been part of the original oversight team decades ago, or at least her name was in the files. The thought of meeting a human survivor here, after all these years, made my pulse spike. I rounded the corner. A figure stepped from the shadows. Mid-40s, uniform tattered, face pale from the cold, eyes wide and unnervingly alert. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice trembled. They're still watching." I swallowed. "Who's watching? The facility?" She shook her head. "No, them. The subjects. Not all of them are asleep anymore." The words made the hair on the back of my neck stand. My mind flashed to the tanks in Gamma Core, the preserved subjects. Were they evolving while I walked among them? And what did she mean by awake? "Dr. Vega, how? You should be dead?" she interrupted sharply. "So should I have been. But I made a choice. A terrible choice." She motioned for me to follow her down a side corridor. The walls were narrower here, the frost thicker, and the smell sharper. A mix of chemicals and something biological, almost metallic. As we moved, she explained, I stayed behind when the project was officially shut down. The higher-ups, they didn't want anyone to know what really happened here. The files you've seen, they don't tell half of it. I kept records. And I watched. For decades, I watched what became of the subjects. I couldn't help but ask the question burning in my mind. And what became of them? She hesitated. Some adapted. Some disappeared entirely. Some turned. Against everything we thought we knew about consciousness. There are things here, deep in the core, that can think, act, and even manipulate perception. You might already feel it. Her gaze pierced me, and for the first time, I realized she was right. The subtle vibrations, the shadowy flickers, the sense of being observed, they were no longer anomalies. I was part of an experiment, whether I liked it or not. We reached a door labeled Omega Core Systems. She paused, glancing at the panel. This is where it all began, and where it continues. Whatever you expect, it's worse, and better, depending on what you value: survival, knowledge, control. I asked the question I couldn't shake. Why haven't you left? Her lips tightened. I tried, but once you spend too long inside, too deep, you see things no one else can, and they bind you. She didn't elaborate, but I understood. The paradox of the facility was not just physical, it was psychological. Time, reality, even memory could be weaponized against those who entered. We stepped through the door. The room was enormous, far larger than any chamber I had seen. In the center, a circular platform hummed with low-frequency energy. Tubes and conduits ran from the walls into the floor. At the edge, several human-shaped figures were slumped in suspended animation. Yet the energy pulsating from the platform made the air vibrate, and I sensed cognition within them. One of the figures stirred. A hand twitched. Another exhaled a breath, visible even in the freezing room. "Are they alive?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Dr. Vega shook her head. "Not alive. Not dead. Something else. Something between." Questions raced through my mind. How far could consciousness stretch? Could it survive without a body? Could it control its environment? Could it even escape? And then she spoke. We weren't the first to think about human enhancement, but we were the first to act. These subjects, were designed to test limits, physical, mental, temporal. Boundaries were shattered. Not all survived. Some evolved. I stepped closer to the platform. The hum grew louder, resonating in my chest. I realized that the energy wasn't just mechanical. It had intelligence, intent, observation. Dr. Vega noticed my hesitation. They're aware of you, of me, of all of us. The facility doesn't just monitor life, it negotiates with it. The paradox tightened like a vice. Knowledge promised insight, yet insight promised consequences I couldn't predict. I wondered, could I survive the questions the facility would ask of me? Could I endure the answers? A sudden flicker of movement drew my gaze to one of the slumped figures. It raised its head. Eyes, human, yet impossibly deep, fixed on me. And then, a whisper, low and distant, yet unmistakable. "Why are you here?" Dr. Vega's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Don't answer. Not yet. That's the first test." I froze. The voice wasn't threatening, but it carried weight. An intelligence that measured, analyzed, and waited. I realized then, every step I had taken had been observed, every decision recorded, every hesitation catalogued. The facility was not just a prison or a laboratory, it was a sentient evaluator. Questions piled on questions. Why was it still operational? How had it survived decades of abandonment? Were the subjects still truly human, or something beyond definition? And most pressing, could I leave without being rewritten, reshaped, or erased? Dr. Vega led me further into the room, pointing to terminals along the wall. Each screen displayed fluctuating data, neural activity, environmental readings, and something else. Patterns that shouldn't exist. Shapes in the data that suggested not only consciousness, but intent. These are the subjects who passed thresholds, she explained. Thresholds we thought impossible. They've integrated systems, learned environments, and they communicate. Not with words, but with thought, collective awareness, and now they know you're here. I swallowed. And if I engage with them? Her eyes were steady, almost grim. Then you're part of the experiment. There's no turning back. A sudden noise echoed through the chamber. A metallic click. One of the slumped figures rose fully now, energy radiating from it like heat from ice. I realized, with a chill that reached my core, that intelligence had shape. It had form. And it had questions. The first question it seemed to ask, without speaking. Why do you exist here? Are you curiosity or threat? I wanted to answer, but the voice, or thought, it was speaking in felt like more than language. It was comprehension, analysis, judgment, and it expected more than a simple reply. Dr. Vega whispered, "Do not engage directly. They learn from interaction. They anticipate. They manipulate perception." I felt the hum of the core grow stronger. It pulsed through the floor, walls, and even into my bones. and with it came a subtle shift in the air, almost like consciousness moving through space. My questions grew sharper. Could intelligence exist without flesh? Could thought influence reality itself? Were we walking into the origin of something far beyond human understanding? Another figure emerged, tall, features obscured by frost, but clearly human in form. Its presence radiated dominance, intellect, and something alien. It tilted its head, as if pondering my existence. "Do you fear us? Do you understand what we are?" I couldn't answer. My mind raced. Fear, fascination, and disbelief intertwined. Could I comprehend what I was seeing? Could any human truly understand this? And yet, the paradox remained. Here was life beyond death, thought beyond flesh, and a question posed directly to me, one I wasn't ready to answer. Dr. Vega's hand gripped mine, a silent warning. She whispered, "We survive by asking questions, not answering them too soon." And there it was, the final paradox of this place. Knowledge demanded engagement, yet engagement carried risk. Answers existed, but only those who dared to proceed could glimpse them. As I stood among beings that were neither fully human nor fully machine, I realized the true test had begun. Questions had become currency. Curiosity had become risk, and somewhere deeper in the core, the facility was waiting for my next move. History remembers what it wants, but what it forgets can come back in ways no one could anticipate. The deeper we went, the more I understood that this facility was not merely a relic of Cold War ambition. It was a living archive of human ambition, paranoia, and obsession. And now, it was awake. Dr. Vega led me through a corridor that hummed with barely restrained energy. The walls were lined with reinforced steel, yet frost and condensation leaked through the seams. Pipes twisted like veins, pumping something I couldn't name. Machines buzzed in frequencies I could almost feel in my chest. And then, in a large chamber ahead, I saw it. The core. It was massive, a cylindrical structure the size of a small warehouse, pulsing with energy like a heartbeat. Lights flickered across its surface, shadows dancing in ways that felt deliberate. Somehow, I knew it was aware of us. Not just our presence, but our intentions, our thoughts, our very curiosity. "Most people think the Cold War ended in 91, Dr. Vega said quietly, almost reverently. But that's a lie. Some battles never left the shadows. Some experiments never truly stopped. This is one of them." Took a cautious step closer. The air seemed heavier here, charged. It was as if reality itself resisted my intrusion. Questions cascaded in my mind. How could such a machine exist? How had it survived decades of neglect? And most unnervingly, what did it want? A sudden flicker on the core's interface caught my attention. Graphs, data streams, and diagrams I couldn't begin to understand. Neural activity, molecular structures, energy signatures, and at the bottom, a slowly blinking red line labeled simply, "Observer." "Observer?" I asked, pointing. "They're watching," Dr. Vega whispered. "The core isn't just a machine. It's sentient. It can analyze, predict, and adapt. And when it does, it teaches lessons in ways you won't anticipate." My pulse quickened. Every history documentary I had seen as a kid, every Cold War secret story, suddenly felt like a prelude to this moment. The core was a living relic of an era obsessed with power and secrecy, and now it was evaluating me. Suddenly, a hiss echoed through the room. One of the slumped subjects stirred violently. Frost fell from the ceiling, and the hum of the core spiked. Dr. Vega grabbed my arm. "They're aware of your proximity. Stay calm, don't provoke." But calm was impossible. The figure that rose from the shadows wasn't fully human. Its form was humanoid, but its movements were precise, unnervingly calculated. Eyes glowed faintly, like sensors scanning for intent. "Who are you?" I asked. It didn't answer, not with words, but somehow I understood. It had access to my thoughts, my fears, my curiosity, my intentions, everything. "Why do you enter when warned? What do you seek?" I froze. The voice was inside my mind now, not my ears. And in that moment, the paradox became clear. This wasn't just a facility or a core. It was a mirror of human ambition. It reflected not only what we did, but what we wanted to do. Dr. Vega stepped closer. "Engage cautiously. It learns from interaction, yes, but it respects courage and strategy. Remember, curiosity is its currency. Recklessness is its weapon." I swallowed. Could I bluff? Could I negotiate? Could a human outthink something that had already surpassed our definitions of intelligence? I raised a hand slowly. We're here to understand, to study, to record history that's been erased." The figure paused. The core's hum deepened, resonating across the chamber like a drumbeat. Then the air shifted. A holographic map flickered to life above the platform, showing the tunnels, chambers, and facilities scattered across Alaska's frozen peaks. Not only this complex, but several others, hidden in mountains, valleys, and ice fields. Dr. Vega's voice was tight. "They've catalogued everything, every abandoned site, every project, every secret the US government thought it buried." A shiver ran down my spine. Every Cold War legend I had devoured, the rumored secret bases in Nevada, underground labs in Greenland, abandoned Soviet bunkers, was suddenly connected here. The core wasn't just aware of its own past, it was aware of history itself. I asked the question that now burned in my mind. "Can it communicate with them?" Dr. Vega nodded grimly. "All of them. The subjects, the experiments, the networks. They respond to the core's commands. It's a web of consciousness, and you're inside it." The realization was dizzying. I wasn't just walking through abandoned tunnels. I was walking through a living archive of Cold War obsession. Every experiment, every mission, every top-secret operation, catalogued, observed, and processed by something far beyond human comprehension. Suddenly, the core pulsed violently. Lights flickered. Screens flashed with code I couldn't read. The humanoid figure advanced, but not aggressively. It stopped mere meters away, head tilted as if judging me. And then, the first direct challenge came. "Why should we allow you to leave? What value do you bring to understanding us?" I hesitated. How could I answer? My knowledge of history, my curiosity. They seemed trivial here. But then I remembered every US audience's obsession with untold history, conspiracies, and secret Cold War operations. "Because the world deserves to know," I said firmly. "Because secrets like this, forgotten experiments, hidden agendas, can teach us and warn us." The figure paused, a subtle nod, and then the core shifted. Energy pulsed along the walls. Tubes vibrated. Screens displayed a single question, blinking in red. "Do you comprehend the cost of knowing?" Dr. Vega's voice was almost inaudible. "It's testing you. Not your courage, but your understanding. Every answer carries consequences. Every choice rewrites reality inside these walls." I thought back to the subject in Gamma Core that had stirred earlier. Its movements, its cognition. Perhaps the core wasn't merely sentient. Perhaps it was evolving. Perhaps it could rewrite biology, manipulate consciousness, and even project history into the present. Another hologram emerged, images of experiments long buried. soldiers in frozen tanks, scientists monitoring unknown energy fields, and above it all, the core observing, recording, and adjusting outcomes. It was as though history itself had been curated and controlled by this machine. And then, a whisper, not in my ears, but in my mind. Do you understand time? I blinked. Time? The question felt deeper than physics, deeper than linear history. It was about perception, memory, and consequence. The core wasn't just alive. It was conscious of temporal flow. It had recorded decades of events, yet seemed to experience them continuously. Dr. Vega grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. It's not just watching you. It's predicting you. And if you make a misstep, her voice trailed off. A sudden flash of movement startled me. One of the slumped subjects had awakened fully. Frost shattered as it moved toward us, perfectly coordinated with the core's pulsing energy. Every step it took seemed calculated, every gesture precise. I realized then, they weren't separate from the core. They were part of it. And together, they represented something no human had ever faced. Questions cascaded. Could we survive an encounter with a sentient network of consciousness? Could human reasoning compete with centuries of data, observation, and evolution? And if we failed, what would become of us? Dr. Vega's hand tightened. We survive by understanding, by asking the right questions before answering them, by remaining unpredictable yet coherent, and above all, by remembering that curiosity is our greatest weapon. I nodded. The core pulsed again, like a heartbeat, like a judge measuring my resolve. And then, the first direct engagement. A voice, calm, yet impossibly deep, resonated in my mind. If you seek knowledge, prove it. If you seek survival, prove it. And if you seek history, prove you deserve it. I swallowed. History, knowledge, survival, all hung in balance. And I understood the ultimate paradox. To understand the core, I must surrender control. To survive, I must embrace uncertainty. And to witness history, I must confront the unthinkable. The core pulsed once more, violently, illuminating the chamber. Shadows danced along the walls, humanoid, elongated, impossible. And then it asked, the final challenge for now. What will you sacrifice to learn what must never be forgotten? The question lingered as the chamber fell into tense silence. Outside, the frozen peaks of Alaska waited. Inside, the core and its subjects anticipated my next move. And I knew, without a doubt, there was no turning back. I had crossed the threshold into a world where history, consciousness, and human ambition collided. The core waited, the subjects watched, and the first choice, the first true test of survival and understanding, was mine to make. The deeper you go, the darker it gets, and sometimes the darkness isn't outside, it's inside you. The tunnels beneath Alaska were no longer silent. Each step we took echoed off frozen walls, reverberating like a heartbeat in the icy cavern. Dr. Vega's flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but even the faint glow revealed enough to make me tense. Scattered debris, remnants of experiments, and faded markings that hinted at forgotten knowledge. This place, it's more than abandoned, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's alive, in a way I can't explain. It remembers us. I swallowed hard. Alive. The thought sounded insane, yet the feeling was undeniable. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the core was observing, waiting, not just for movement, but for thought, hesitation, emotion. We reached a fork in the corridor. One path led deeper into the tunnels, where shadows thickened into something almost tangible. The other veered toward a faint hum, a low-frequency vibration that made the air vibrate against our eardrums. "Which way?" I asked, glancing at Dr. Vega. Her gaze lingered on the humming passage. "The core wants us to follow the sound, but it could be a trap." I felt a cold sweat on my back. Traps weren't theoretical anymore. They were probable, and we'd already encountered a few. Every corner, every crevice, could contain consequences we hadn't imagined. And yet, curiosity gnawed at me, relentless. The hum promised answers, or danger. We chose the path toward the vibration. As we moved, holographic projections flickered around us, shadows of past experiments, frozen in ice, but moving, interacting with invisible forces. One projection showed a soldier frantically scribbling notes. Another, a scientist's hand hovering over a device that should have never been built. Each image seemed to ask a silent question. What would you do if you were here? The core's presence was heavy. I felt it in my chest, in the subtle tug of my thoughts, as if it were pulling at my decisions before I even made them. Dr. Vega noticed it too. "It's testing us," she said. "Not just our courage, but our judgment. Every choice, every hesitation. It's recorded, analyzed, and weighed." We entered a chamber. It was small, circular, and lined with consoles displaying streams of data we couldn't begin to understand. In the center, a metallic cylinder pulsed faintly, golden light spilling from its seams. "This," Dr. Vega murmured, stepping closer. "This is the core's heart, or at least a fragment of it. Everything we've seen so far. It's just the outer layers." I reached out, hesitating. The cylinder thrummed under my fingers, sending a ripple of sensation up my arm. Suddenly, images flooded my mind. Memories, probabilities, warnings. I saw alternate outcomes of our exploration, choices we hadn't made yet, consequences that could destroy or save lives. The core's voice echoed, not aloud, but inside me. "Every action has consequence. Every hesitation is observed. Will you act or remain passive?" I glanced at Dr. Vega. Her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and awe. It's challenging us, not just our understanding, but our ethics, our instincts." I realized then that the core didn't want us to solve puzzles. It wanted us to react, to decide under pressure, to demonstrate human resilience and moral reasoning. Every choice we made was recorded, every hesitation stored, and every outcome would echo beyond this chamber, into history itself. The chamber shifted suddenly, walls extending, shadows curling around us like living tendrils. The core had transformed the space into a crucible, forcing confrontation with fear, uncertainty, and responsibility. It wasn't enough to survive. We had to engage, interpret, and act. Dr. Vega took a steadying breath. "Whatever happens next, remember that it's not just about exploration anymore. It's about understanding what it means to be human in the presence of something beyond human." I nodded, gripping my flashlight tighter. The path forward was unclear. Shadows danced, the core pulsed in anticipation, and I felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. Every step would matter. Every choice could reshape the consequences we hadn't yet imagined. And somewhere deep beneath the frozen peaks of Alaska, the core waited, patient, intelligent, relentless, its true purpose still veiled in shadow. The corridors beyond the core seemed alive, not with machines, but with intent. Every echo of my boots, every metallic groan from the walls, felt deliberate, as if the facility itself was aware of my choices, judging my pace, my curiosity, my fear. Dr. Vega moved ahead, silent yet unshakably vigilant, her eyes flicking to every shadow, every flicker of frost. I couldn't stop thinking about the question the core had asked. What will you sacrifice to learn what must never be forgotten? It wasn't rhetorical. Every step deeper made me understand that in this place, knowledge demanded currency, and the payment was never trivial. We reached a junction lined with more chambers. The files had hinted that this section, coded Zeta 19, was experimental, focused on cognitive expansion and temporal awareness. The notes were fragmented, warning that prolonged exposure to these chambers could distort perception. Dr. Vega paused, placing a gloved hand on the wall. "Here," she whispered, "is where they tried to push the mind beyond natural limits. Not all survived. Some are still here, in ways you can't comprehend." I followed her gaze to a room sealed by frosted glass. Shadows moved inside, shapes distorted. A faint hum emanated from the chamber, rhythmic and almost hypnotic. My pulse quickened. Could those inside perceive us? The files suggested residual awareness, cognitive echoes capable of learning, anticipating, even manipulating. I swallowed hard. Are they aware of us? Dr. Vega's eyes were grave. Yes, and not in the way we're used to. Awareness here is collective. They know movement, sound, even thought patterns. They can influence perception. That's why you feel off. Off. The word barely scratched it. My hands itched to touch the walls, to confirm reality. But the subtle vibrations told me something else. The line between observation and interaction was thinning. A part of me, the human part, wanted to flee. The other part, the insatiable curiosity that had led me here, urged me forward. We entered the first chamber. Inside, rows of humanoid figures reclined in suspended animation, not quite alive, not fully dead. Tubes and conduits connected them to the walls, and above each head, a faint pulse of light oscillated in sync with the core's rhythm. The air smelled metallic, like blood, cold and sterile. One figure stirred. A hand twitched. Frost fell from the ceiling in delicate shards. I froze. My mind raced. Was it a reflex? Or was it testing me? Dr. Vega didn't move. "They're aware," she said softly. "Even minor actions, breathing patterns, hesitation. It all feeds into their collective cognition. They don't react like humans. They anticipate. They learn." A sudden flicker of movement caught my eye. Across the room, a figure lifted its head fully. Eyes, unnervingly human, yet layered with something ancient, locked onto mine. A subtle pulse resonated through the floorboards, an almost imperceptible warning, like a heartbeat I could feel in my chest. The paradox hit me. I was surrounded by what was once human, yet not. Knowledge, intelligence, and consciousness had merged with technology, with environment, with the facility itself. Each pulse, each flicker, each shadow was a test. Every step forward was a negotiation. Questions flooded my mind. Were these subjects remnants of humanity, or the first step toward something else entirely? Could they communicate without sound? Could they manipulate us in ways we couldn't perceive? And most chillingly, had they already begun learning from me, cataloging my every move, adjusting their responses in real time? Dr. Vega motioned for me to follow a narrow corridor leading to the second chamber. Frost lined the walls, yet the air inside felt warmer, almost breathable. Here, the experiments focused on temporal cognition, teaching subjects to perceive sequences, anticipate outcomes, and experience time non-linearly. The files suggested failure rates were high, but some subjects had survived, evolving beyond predictable patterns. I paused, recalling the core's blinking indicator labeled Observer. Every interaction, every question, every hesitation had been recorded. Was the core studying us, or the subjects studying us through the core? Could we survive without being rewritten in thought, in perception, or even in memory? In the chamber, more subjects stirred. One stood slowly, almost gracefully. Frost fell from its shoulders, yet it moved with purpose, analyzing, calculating. The files had warned. These were not mindless automatons. They integrated environmental cues, human behavior, even intuition. Every move I made was part of an experiment I had not agreed to. I swallowed. What happens if we provoke them? Dr. Vega's expression hardened. You don't. Provocation here isn't physical, it's cognitive. A gesture, a question, even a look can trigger adaptation, defensive behavior, or worse, manipulation. You must act unpredictably yet consistently. Logic alone won't save you. I took a step closer, curiosity fighting instinct. The figure's eyes followed. Then it tilted its head, almost imperceptibly. A pulse resonated through the floor, a communication without words, a challenge. Questions collided in my mind. Could I outthink a collective consciousness? Could human reasoning compete with decades, even centuries, of observation and adaptation? Could curiosity itself, my relentless drive, be used against me? Dr. Vega whispered, "You're part of it now. Every question you ask, every hesitation you show, it's feeding them. And yet, you must continue. To stop is to die. To go forward is to survive if you understand the rules." I realized then that the paradox was complete. Survival demanded curiosity. Knowledge demanded risk, and the facility, the core, and its subjects, all were intertwined in a living experiment that had no precedent, no exit, no oversight. I took a deep breath. Each step deeper was a negotiation with history, intelligence, and evolution. And somewhere in the pulsing heart of the core, a question waited. How much are you willing to risk to understand what must never be forgotten? The answer, I knew, would determine not only my survival, but the legacy of every secret buried beneath Alaska's frozen peaks. What if the more you knew, the less you were yourself? That paradox hung over us, like the frozen ceiling above the chamber, sharp and unyielding. Every pulse of light, every subtle movement of the subjects, whispered the same unanswerable question. Is knowledge liberation or imprisonment? Dr. Vega led the way through a narrow corridor, its walls vibrating faintly, as if the facility itself was aware of our passage. I felt it. The same disorienting sensation from Zeta 19, only stronger, more invasive. My thoughts didn't feel entirely my own. Fleeting notions, whispers of doubt, even memories I wasn't sure were mine, were being questioned. This section, Dr. Vega murmured, is called Omega 33. It's where they attempted temporal integration. Subjects were made to perceive events not in sequence, but as overlapping possibilities. It's the only chamber where cognition meets, well, something beyond humanity. I followed, gripping the cold railing. Shadows moved in the corner of my vision. I tried to rationalize air currents, frost, but the hum of the chamber was unmistakable. Each vibration, each flicker of light felt deliberate, like the chamber itself was analyzing us. Inside Omega 33, the subjects weren't reclined. They floated, or appeared to, suspended in mid-air, their forms blurred, edges dissolving like ice melting in sunlight. A pulse emanated from each, synchronizing with the core's beat. I realized with sudden, chilling clarity, their consciousness wasn't contained. It was distributed, linked through the facility's network, and through some mechanism I couldn't comprehend. It touched us. One subject's gaze found mine. Not just seeing me, but through me, scanning every instinct, every fear, every question I hadn't yet asked. My pulse raced. The files had hinted at this, but nothing prepared me for actual contact. It was like staring into a mirror that reflected not your face, but the hidden architecture of your mind. "Do they know what we're thinking?" I whispered. Dr. Vega's voice was steady, but I detected tension. More than that, they anticipate thought patterns. They map behavior, predict hesitation, even emotional responses. Logic won't save you. Instinct alone might not either. I realized then the cruel paradox that governed the core. The deeper you ventured, the more you understood, the more vulnerable you became. Knowledge itself was a weapon, against the unwary, against the curious, against me. My very curiosity was their tool, shaping me even as I sought to shape them. I moved closer to the nearest subject, compelled by a force I didn't fully recognize, part scientific curiosity, part existential dread. Its form shifted, a ripple of light and shadow. A whisper brushed my consciousness. Not words, not language, but meaning. An impression of choice, of consequence. "You are not here by accident." I staggered back. It spoke to me. Dr. Vega's eyes darkened. "And now, it has begun the integration." That was the first test. Subtle, cognitive, but irreversible. The more you react, the more they learn, and the more they adapt. You're already part of the system. The paradox tightened around me like ice chains. To advance was to risk assimilation. To retreat was to risk exposure, or worse, irrelevance. Every decision carried weight I couldn't measure, yet I had to continue. We reached the final chamber in Omega 33, where the core's pulse was strongest. Frost and shadow danced along the walls, and suspended above us. A lattice of energy arcs formed geometric patterns that defied comprehension. Dr. Vega gestured for me to observe, but not touch. "The core itself," she said, "is a repository, a processor, a consciousness. It doesn't just record events. It influences them, shapes perception, even extends temporally. That's why nothing here is linear. That's why even your memory might not be entirely yours." I swallowed hard. The weight of it pressed against my chest. Time, memory, identity, everything I thought I knew was mutable here. The facility wasn't just a place. It was a crucible, testing not endurance or intelligence, but the essence of self. A sudden flicker caught my eye. The lattice of energy arcs pulsed violently, and for an instant, the room shifted. Not physically, but perceptually. The chamber seemed larger, then smaller, then impossibly infinite. I blinked, and the subject in the corner of my vision was gone. Dr. Vega noticed my glance. "It's learning from absence now, not presence." A chill ran down my spine. In that instant, I understood. In Omega 33, even stillness was action, even ignorance was data. And somewhere, in the pulsating heart of the core, a decision was being made about me, my thoughts, my very existence. The paradox remained. The more I sought to understand, the less I could trust myself. And as we prepared to exit the chamber, I sensed, just before the hum surged, a presence behind us. Not audible, not visible, but undeniable. Something had moved, or perhaps it had always been there. And it was waiting. What if the truth you chased revealed not the world outside, but the limits of your own mind? That paradox echoed through the corridors as I followed Dr. Vega deeper into the labyrinth. Each step felt heavier, the weight of knowledge pressing against my skull like the ice outside, suffocating, unyielding, yet impossible to ignore. Omega 33 had prepared me, But what lay ahead was entirely different. The chambers widened into an expansive hall. Overhead, conduits hummed, pumping a strange energy that caused the hair on my arms to prickle. The faint glow of suspended subjects illuminated frost-crusted walls. Yet the most unnerving part wasn't what I could see. It was what I couldn't. The subtle awareness that someone, was tracking my every thought. The core, Dr. Vega said softly, learns not just from observation, but interaction. Your presence alone feeds its models. Every hesitation, every question, it catalogues. I swallowed hard. The paradox of knowledge tightened around me again. The more I sought answers, the more I became part of the experiment. Every step forward risked assimilation into the very system I was trying to understand. The hall split into multiple chambers, each sealed with reinforced doors. Labels indicated functions like cognitive expansion, neural synchronization, and adaptive containment. The files had mentioned these areas, but only in fragmented notes. Seeing them in person made the scale of Project Nemo undeniable. This wasn't merely preservation, it was evolution. A human experiment designed to push consciousness beyond the boundaries of flesh and time. We approached a central chamber marked Sigma Core. Dr. Vega hesitated at the door. This is where they attempted full integration of all subjects. The core's influence is strongest here. Most who entered never left the same. I could feel it already. My thoughts grew sharper, yet disjointed, racing in ways I hadn't intended. Memories of corridors I'd passed flickered, then reassembled strangely. The facility wasn't just alive. It was rearranging perception, testing mental resilience, and blurring the line between reality and observation. Inside Sigma Core, the subjects were suspended in a lattice of energy. Each pulse resonated with the core, linking their awareness into a singular, distributed cognition. Some moved subtly, shifting limbs or eyes, but the consciousness projected from them extended beyond the physical. I realized they were everywhere. Not just in the room, not just in the chamber, but everywhere in the network of the facility. They had become the core in miniature. Dr. Vega stepped closer, whispering, "What you feel, that's their cognition probing yours. It's subtle, but it's deliberate. Even one lapse in awareness could alter the core's interpretation of you. You become part of the data." I felt the pull of it, the lure of understanding, the temptation to engage, to ask questions, to touch the network. But instinct screamed that every interaction carried weight I couldn't calculate. Curiosity had a cost, and here it demanded payment in more than just knowledge. Suddenly, a subtle shift. One subject's form elongated, flickering between solid and light. A voice, or thought, entered my mind, clear, unyielding. "Why are you here? Do you seek understanding, or do you seek control?" Dr. Vega's hand gripped my arm. "Do not answer. Silence is protection. Every response feeds them. Every word is mapped and analyzed." I froze, pulse hammering. The paradox hit harder than ever. To survive, I needed knowledge. But to gain knowledge, I had to interact with something far beyond comprehension. Even passivity was engagement. And yet, moving forward was the only choice. Retreat risked erasure, or worse, becoming trapped in observation indefinitely. As we backed away toward another corridor, a sudden vibration coursed through the floor. Frost fell from the ceiling in tiny showers. One of the suspended subjects twitched violently, energy rippling outward like shock waves in water. My breath caught. "The core is aware," Dr. Vega said quietly. "It's testing limits now. It wants to know what you will do under pressure, what you value. and what you fear. I took a step back. Shadows seemed to stretch, flickering unnaturally. In that instant, I understood. The experiment wasn't just about the subjects. It was about me. Every thought, every hesitation catalogued, analyzed, and stored in a consciousness far older, far more patient than I could imagine. And then I felt it. A presence behind us. Not subtle this time, but undeniable. A thought, a rhythm, something watching, moving, anticipating. I turned slightly, flashlight catching a shimmer in the frost. But the figure wasn't fully visible, yet its awareness pressed on my mind, like a hand on my shoulder. Dr. Vega whispered, tense. It's waiting, and it knows. You know it's there. I froze. The paradox was absolute. The more I tried to understand, the less I truly knew. And in that frozen hall, with the lattice of consciousness all around, I realized the real test hadn't begun yet. Something was coming. What if survival depended not on strength, but on understanding your own thoughts? That was the paradox. As I stepped further into the frozen labyrinth, Dr. Vega beside me, every nerve taut. The corridors hummed with energy I couldn't see, but could feel pulsing through the walls, through the steel floors, through me. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet the mind demanded forward. The next chamber, marked Theta-Convergence, was enormous, a cathedral of suspended subjects. Each was enveloped in a lattice of energy, their faint glows synchronized like a heartbeat I could feel more than hear. The core's reach was undeniable. The paradox pressed. Knowledge here promised insight, but insight carried consequences I couldn't calculate. Every flicker of thought could be monitored, interpreted, weaponized. Dr. Vega's voice cut softly through the hum. Theta was designed to integrate awareness. The core links consciousness, creating patterns. It sees beyond eyes, hears beyond ears, knows beyond presence. Every decision you make is data. I tried to focus, but the subjects weren't merely dormant. One shifted subtly, eyes locking, not at me, but into me, projecting awareness. It wasn't just observation, it was assessment. And then a whisper, not in sound, but thought, entered my mind. Do you know the cost of knowing? I hesitated. To answer would be to feed the network. To ignore could provoke it. The paradox of choice hit me like a hammer. Silence was action. Engagement was exposure. Curiosity was both weapon and vulnerability. The chamber rippled as another subject moved. This one taller, elongated, an impossible fusion of human form and energy pattern. Its presence alone distorted perception. Shadows shifted unnaturally, walls bending slightly in my peripheral vision. Dr. Vega's whisper came urgently. Do not react. Do not anticipate. Move with intention, but slowly. They measure everything. I could feel my thoughts leaking, analyzed, categorized. The core wasn't just aware, it was predictive. It could simulate possible outcomes, manipulate perception, and even induce hesitation. Every fear, every question I had harbored since entering the facility was now a variable in its calculations. A sudden tremor ran through the floor. Frost fell in tiny avalanches. One of the suspended subjects in the lattice twitched violently, energy radiating outward, and I realized it wasn't containment I feared, it was interaction. The network could communicate across space, across chambers, across minds. I was inside the system now, a part of it whether I consented or not. Dr. Vega motioned toward a narrow passage. There's a control node ahead. If we reach it, we can observe the core's operational parameters, get a glimpse of its logic. But it's risky. It will know we're here, anticipate every move. I swallowed, the paradox gnawing. Understanding required engagement, but engagement carried unknown costs. One misstep could erase perception, identity, perhaps even survival. As we stepped toward the node, a figure emerged at the far end of the chamber. Human-shaped, yet impossibly fluid. It tilted its head, aware, evaluating. Its gaze, or consciousness, fixed on me. And in a pulse that bypassed sound entirely, it asked, "Why do you come? Do you seek to know, or to be known?" I froze. The question was not for my voice, but for my mind. And I knew any answer, even thought, was part of the test. Dr. Vega's hand gripped mine. "We're close, but the real trial begins now." The network pulsed, energy arcing across the lattice. Shadows stretched, shimmered, then paused. And in that frozen cathedral, I realized the line between observer and observed had vanished. I had no choice but to move forward. And something waited, just beyond the next doorway, aware of everything I thought I knew. The paradox was simple, yet unbearable. The closer I got to understanding, the less control I had. The core, the network, the subjects, it was all one consciousness now, and I was intruding inside it. Dr. Vega guided me down the narrow corridor, leading to the heart of the core, every step echoing like a drum beat in my chest. Frost sparkled in strange patterns along the walls, almost deliberately, as if marking my path. At the entrance, a tall, human-shaped figure blocked the threshold. Its eyes glowed faintly, an iridescent shimmer that made reality feel unstable. It tilted its head, observing me, not my body, not my voice, but my intent. The core had trained its sentience to detect motives, patterns, and curiosity itself. I realized that by simply thinking, I was already participating in the test. Dr. Vega whispered, "It doesn't want violence. It wants comprehension. And it measures everything: hesitation, thought, even fear." I swallowed and stepped forward. The core's pulse resonated through the floor, up through my boots, into my spine. Every fiber of the facility seemed alive, every conduit, every lattice of suspended subjects vibrating in sync with the core's awareness. My mind raced with questions. Could consciousness exist beyond flesh? Could knowledge rewrite reality? Could curiosity itself be weaponized? The figure raised a hand, or something like a hand, and the lattice of energy pulsed. I felt data stream into me, images, calculations, centuries of observation. The core wasn't just sentient, it was omniscient within its domain. And yet, there was no hostility, only the evaluation of worthiness. "Why are you here?" The voice, inside my mind, was both singular and infinite. "Do you seek understanding, or merely to survive?" I thought carefully. Every hesitation, every lie, would be known. To understand, I projected mentally, to witness history that was erased, to ensure the lessons aren't lost again. The core pulsed again, slower this time, as if considering. The subjects in the lattice shimmered. Some twitched, others remained still. Time felt stretched, a paradox of frozen moments and accelerated cognition. Then a whisper, Dr. Vega's voice, trembling. "It will test your choices. Every step forward is a step into consequence." Suddenly, the core projected a holographic vision. Alaska's frozen peaks, hidden tunnels, abandoned facilities, and every secret experiment. Each was connected to the others, like veins of a living organism spanning decades. I realized we were inside the mind of history itself, and the core wasn't just aware of us, it was history. The final challenge came, subtle yet undeniable. The figure in front of me leaned closer, consciousness pressing against mine. "Will you risk yourself to preserve what should remain buried?" Dr. Vega's hand tightened on mine. There's no turning back. Whatever you choose now, the facility already knows. I inhaled, feeling the paradox like ice in my chest. Knowledge demanded engagement, engagement demanded risk, and risk could rewrite everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what it meant to survive. The core pulsed violently. Energy arced through the lattice. Shadows stretched and shifted across the walls, humanoid yet alien. And then it asked, not in words, but in a thought that resonated through my very consciousness, "What will you sacrifice to learn the truths we guard?" I froze. And in that heartbeat, I knew one undeniable truth. The answers were coming, whether I was ready or not.